The churches and the fire department are the social fabric of Gordonsville, and they have been probably always. I think the families that have been in Gordonsville for a long time, it's important to them as well. They have ancestors that were in that fire company. They have ancestors that were longtime deacon of this church and that church. And so there's a strong sense of community here that is hard to describe to anyone else. And there's a legacy, and we all feel like we have one, not to a title, but to support our town and to keep it going. So that's one of our strengths that's hard to itemize, but it exists. There's a strong fabric in Gordonsville.
Roadside Tavern, bustling railroad town, present-day destination village. The central Piedmont community of Gordonsville, Virginia has seen it all, from boom to bust and back again. It has witnessed the ravages of war firsthand. It has enjoyed peace and prosperity. It has survived windstorms, hurricanes, ice storms, and devastating fires. It's been sucked in by wild dream schemes and cowed by bitter disappointments. But what has held it together for the past 200-plus years is the strong fabric of its citizens and their sense of history.
We've got the railroad, we've got the Civil War history, and with Madison and Jefferson visiting each other, and Gordonsville at that time just being Gordon's Tavern, being the town located between their homes, we have our colonial connection.
The town gets its name from Nathaniel Gordon, a Scotsman who at age 24 purchased a 1,350-acre plantation in 1787. By 1794, he had applied for a license to build and operate a tavern at the crossroads of the Great Fredericksburg and Richmond roads, right where the present-day traffic circle is. Thomas Jefferson described this establishment as a good house. Visitors included James Monroe, the Marquis de Lafayette, and possibly George Washington. By 1813, the village of Newville was renamed Gordonsville, and Gordon was appointed postmaster. When he died in 1820, the tavern and 250 acres went to his son John. Another 250 acres east of the tavern, where Main Street runs today, went to his son-in-law, Dr. Charles Beale. By 1835, Gordonsville was a daily stage stop on the Fredericksburg to Charlottesville route and a twice-weekly mail stop between Richmond and Harrisonburg. 5 years later, in 1840, something momentous happened. It would determine Gordonsville's future for the next century. The railroad steamed into town. It's fortunate that it did, because coming from Louisa, it could have bypassed Gordonsville and gone straight to Charlottesville. But thanks to the persuasive negotiating ability of local brothers James and Philip Barber, Gordonsville was included in the loop, thus ensuring its prosperous future. The Barbers were an influential family who called Gordonsville home. James was governor of Virginia, a U.S. senator, secretary of war, and ambassador to England. His brother Philip was Speaker of the House and an associate Supreme Court justice, among other things. The same year that the railroad arrived, 1840, construction began on the freight depot, and Richard Omohundro secured a tavern license where the Exchange Hotel stands today. The original Gordon Tavern continued to operate 3/4 of a mile to the northwest. The Richmond Road ran between the two taverns, and the land on either side was mostly owned by Dr. Charles Beale. He envisioned what became today's Main Street. Gordonsville became a boom town. Between 1842 and 1843, 2.6 million tons of freight, mostly agricultural products from the Green Springs area of Louisa County, were shipped from Gordonsville. The trip to Richmond took 5 hours. Passengers rode in 43-foot-long wooden coaches, divided into men's and women's apartments. Wood-burning stoves kept them warm in winter, water barrels cool in summer. In 1848, the Blue Ridge Turnpike Company was chartered to build a road from Gordonsville over the Blue Ridge Mountains to Newmarket. 2 years later, the Rockingham Turnpike was chartered, linking Harrisonburg to the railhead at Gordonsville. A lively backcountry trade developed, where farmers and manufacturers from as far away as the Shenandoah Valley brought their products to Gordonsville for shipment to market by rail. And finally, in 1854, the Orange and Alexandria Railroad was completed to Gordonsville from Orange and points further north. When that line was extended south to Charlottesville in 1860, and from there west to Stanton and further south to Lynchburg, Gordonsville became the vital rail junction and crossroads to all points of the compass in central Virginia. If you were changing trains in Gordonsville, you probably went to Omohundro's Tavern to wait. When that burned down in 1859, it was quickly rebuilt the next year as the Exchange Hotel, which stands to this day. It may have been built by Gordonsville's own Benjamin Faulkner, who also built for his brother E.J., who would later become mayor, a house on Main Street in 1856 that is a splendid example of local vernacular, non-Jeffersonian architecture. In the spring of 1861, war broke out. 5 days after Virginia seceded from the Union, Robert E. Lee came through town. Later that summer, town citizens were horrified as wounded arrived in Gordonsville after the first major land battle of the war at Manassas. Civil War wounded arriving in town would become a common sight. In March of 1862, the Samuel P. Moore Receiving Hospital was moved from Manassas to the Exchange Hotel in Gordonsville. Connected by telegraph to hospitals in Richmond, Farmville, and Lynchburg, the Exchange Hotel served as a triage facility, sorting out the trainloads of sick, wounded, and dying men, and sending them on to whatever hospital had room for them. Under the command of Dr. Brewerton Monroe Levy of South Carolina, the hotel building itself was used as administrative offices, doctors' quarters, a dispensary, a surgery, and a few wards for sick and wounded officers. The rank and file would have been housed in a sea of tents pitched in the surrounding grounds. The overflow were accommodated in private homes and businesses throughout the town. In an 11-month period from July of 1863 until May of 1864, 23,000 men came through this facility, 6,000 in 1 month alone. Miraculously, of the 70,000 men who came through here throughout the entire war, less than 800 died. They were reinterred in Maplewood Cemetery in 1866. After the war, the Exchange Hotel became a quarantine facility for those with infectious diseases. Later, it served as the area's first Freedman's Bureau. After Reconstruction, it reverted to being a busy railroad hotel. But as the fortunes of passenger rail declined, so did the hotels. It became a boarding house, then a derelict. By the late 1960s and early 70s, the Exchange Hotel was in danger of being lost. It found a benefactor in the form of Elizabeth Schneider. She and other preservation-minded local citizens saved and restored the grand old building. Today, the Exchange Hotel is a remarkable Civil War museum with one-of-a-kind exhibits of Civil War-era uniforms and weaponry, as well as a comprehensive look at Civil War-era hospital and medical practices of the time. It's also an elegant antebellum backdrop for Civil War reenactments. And recently, the Exchange Hotel has become a magnet for those seeking a paranormal experience. Digital cameras and recorders have captured hundreds of unexplained photos and thousands of electronic voice phenomena. The Discovery Channel has ranked it one of the 15 most haunted places in America. Because of its railroad connection, Gordonsville was also extremely important strategically. If the Union could capture it, and it tried constantly, it could sever Lee's connection to his breadbasket in the Shenandoah Valley. One such attempt occurred in August of 1862, when Union General John Pope set his sights on the important rail junction and supply depot. Stonewall Jackson responded by moving 12,000 men, using 8 trains that ran day and night for 10 days straight. They disembarked at Gordonsville, camped in and around the town. Stonewall himself stayed at the old tavern, worshiping and doubtless falling asleep to the Reverend Daniel Ewing's sermons at Gordonsville Presbyterian Church. Stonewall's men marched off to Culpeper County and turned Pope back at the Battle of Cedar Mountain. Local units included the 7th Virginia Cavalry and the Gordonsville Greys, Company C of the 13th Virginia Infantry. A look at their roster reveals many long-standing Gordonsville names, such as Beale, Baker, Coward, Falconer, Newman, Omohundro, just to name a few. Troops passed through here again on their way to the Battle of Second Manassas and on to the Confederacy's first northern invasion, resulting in the bloodiest single day in American history, Antietam. And of course, most of the Army of Northern Virginia was hunkered down in Orange County for the entire winter of 1863-64. The closest the Union came to capturing Gordonsville occurred in December of 1864. Known as Torbert's Christmas Raid, Union cavalry descended into Orange County at Liberty Mills. They made it to the summit of Cameron's Mountain, then known as Bell's Mountain, about a mile out of town, before being turned back by troops rushed to Gordonsville by rail from Richmond. Torbert lost 7 men and 258 horses in a 10-day campaign, where it either rained, sleeted, or snowed 6 of those 10 days. After the war, Gordonsville made a rather remarkable recovery. Chartered by the General Assembly in 1870, it was described as a thriving town. Dr. Charles Beale's widow continued to fulfill his dream of a well-planned community, with residential development occurring northwest of the railroad overpass over Main Street and commercial development occurring southeast of that overpass. Water from Cameron's Mountain was piped into town by the late 1880s. An Orange County business directory published in 1878 listed 123 merchants in the entire county. 65 of them were located in Gordonsville. The town boasted 1 tailor, 3 barbers, 3 watchmakers and jewelers, 4 boot and shoemakers, 6 doctors and dentists, as well as grocers, bakers, blacksmiths, harness makers, a wheelwright, and an agricultural equipment, feed, and fertilizer dealer. There was even a chair manufacturer.
And do you know there were about 1,500 people in Gordonsville in the 1870s during that boom time? And there are right now 1,500 people. There are a lot more homes, but back then you'd had homes with 8 and 9 people in the household. Now you've got 1 little old lady in a whole lot of the households. So it's a lot more homes, but the same number of people.
By 1878, plank sidewalks had been built and street lighting had been installed. The same year that the Gordonsville Graded School, the first public free education in town, was cited by an inspector for allowing sexes to intermingle in the classroom. Young ladies seeking a more formal education could attend the Woodlawn Seminary. Later, Gordonsville had its own high school. Baseball was a popular pastime in Gordonsville from the early 1870s on. A fierce rivalry simmered for decades between teams from Orange and Gordonsville. And the backcountry trade continued to keep the town busy. Wagons brimming with produce rattled down Main Street to the tie yard near the depot. Cattle drives down Main Street to pens across from the Exchange Hotel were common. There was even an account of a buffalo getting loose and rampaging through the town the better part of a night. And there were plenty of saloons and bars where you could quench your thirst, and there may even have been a house of ill repute. At the huge St. John's Hotel, railroad passengers were allowed a half hour for dinner, at which point a porter dressed in white would ring a large bell while the conductor proclaimed, "All aboard." The noise in town was deafening. The roar of trains and the shriek of locomotives never ceased day or night. Each landlord kept a gong 12 feet in diameter and run by steam going all the time, wrote Dr. George Bagby. It was Bagby who first described Gordonsville as the chicken leg center of the universe. He was referring to the practice of enterprising African American women greeting arriving trains with baskets heaped with edible goodies, in particular fried chicken. Bagby said even the town dogs knew the train schedule as well as the station master, because they would all flock to the scene hoping an errant piece of chicken or a gnawed bone would fall their way. Chicken legs and breasts cost 15 cents apiece. By 1879, the town council required a snack vendor's license. The practice continued well into the 20th century and was only replaced by the invention of dining cars and the advent of air conditioning on trains, which sealed all the windows. Recently, the tradition has been revived at a local restaurant. Gordonsville owed its success to the railroad, so it's ironic that because of the railroad, the boom went bust. In 1880, the Washington City, Virginia Midland, and Great Southern Railroad came to Orange from the north and then turned southwest to Charlottesville, bypassing Gordonsville. Now the teamsters of backcountry trade needed only to go as far as Somerset and Barboursville to load their products on board a train. Those two communities boomed, and Gordonsville was left out of the loop. Still, the boomtown dream persisted. The Gordon Land Company advertised Gordonsville as the luckiest point in Virginia, with quick sales and sure profits guaranteed. In 1891, the company published a 6-foot by 6-foot map that outlined its grandiose schemes: mountaintop villas, vast industrial complexes, avenues and boulevards, ellipses and fountains, you name it. Within 2 years, the Gordon Land Company was in receivership and the town of Gordonsville came back down to earth as a rural community in Piedmont, Virginia. Shortly after it entered the 20th century, it was introduced to the benefits of electric power. During the Depression, the railroad, which had brought so much prosperity, now brought hucksters and shysters and hobos riding the rails. The jail was left open at night, so the homeless had a place to sleep. In 1947, the old Gordon Tavern was razed. Famous landmark yielding to the March of Progress, proclaimed the headline in the Orange County Review. It made way for today's traffic circle, which for years was one of only 2 roundabouts in the entire state. It was New Year's Day, 1916, something like 1 o'clock in the morning, when a small fire in a confectionery shop on Main Street near the railroad overpass became a big fire. It spread rapidly. Water pressure from Cameron's Mountain was woefully inadequate to quell the blaze. Dynamiting an adjoining building didn't stop the advance of the fire. The Charlottesville Volunteer Fire Department came to the rescue, sending a pumper by rail. It made the journey in 18 minutes. Charlottesville would help again 4 years later when another fire took out buildings from the present town hall southeast. But by then, Gordonsville had a pumper of its own. In that fire, it worked for 10 hours straight. The Gordonsville Volunteer Fire Department was organized in April of 1916, and to this day it remains a vital part of that strong fabric that holds this community together. A tradition of leadership, both in fire department and on town government, runs through at least 3 generations of coiners.
Roots run deep. It's important. It's not just a job, it's a way of life for me.
Today, Gordonsville is again thriving, having undergone a renaissance thanks primarily to some benefactors.
I truly hope that people do appreciate, to the extent it should be appreciated, what's been done the last 10 years. Paul Manning and Bruce and Jacqueline Gupton have put so much money and so much time into this town, and there was no way there was economic payback on the far end for them. It truly was, a passion for them to help kind of restore this small town, and they have my eternal gratitude, and I hope my descendants feel even more so as they look back.
And plans are well on their way to make further improvements to Main Street, Gordonsville.
Well, we'll be bricking some of the sidewalks and not others. We're going to about double the width of the sidewalk on the shop side of the street versus what I call the bank and town hall side of the street. And since that gets most of the pedestrian traffic, they're going to be widened, and also enough room for the nice 14-foot beautiful colonial street lamps and trees. to soften up that hardscape along that side.
200 years old, and still there's a strong fabric in Gordonsville.
A winter wind blowing down snow-covered ground, midnight sky as black as ink, snowflake stars falling down. Wayside tavern window light beckons on to me. Tarry by the hard side bright, seek your company. I dropped in, joined a den so carefree and so loud, just to lose old Mr. Blue, mingle with the crowd. Moonlight glows where the whiskey flows, ember down my glass, burns my lips like a passionate kiss. I can't let you pass.